So who am I? Why am I here talking? Why are you here listening to me? I'm a parent of a child with a food allergy, first and foremost. I have a child who does have a peanut allergy, as well as a child that doesn't have a food allergy. However, we're understanding that he has the development of oral allergy syndrome. So that's a whole nother piece to this allergy puzzle in our family. On top of that, I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor. I have over 15 years in the field, and I studied marriage and family therapy. So a lot of times when I'm working with clients, including teens or sometimes even children, I'm looking at it from a systems perspective. I'm looking at it from the entire family. I'm looking at it from how parents are impacting the situation, how marriage is impacting. I'm looking at all of the pieces. To me, doing this kind of work is helping figure out the puzzle pieces and then helping you guys understand what all that looks like and how you can change those puzzle pieces. I've worked in hospital settings, both inpatient and outpatient. I've worked in community agency, and I've been in private practice for about probably 10 years now. I've also worked in the school settings, so I have a unique understanding of different areas where food allergies might impact. As you've noted, that I offer general counseling to those managing food allergies and those that don't have food allergies. And I've also created the Food Allergy Counselor Directory. When I was trying to locate people in my own field who had food allergy understanding, it was very hard to find these professionals. And so if I myself in the field am having a hard time, I can imagine how hard it is for families to find these providers. So that was one of the reasons why I developed the Food Allergy Counselor Directory. Additionally, most of our fields, so there's psychology, there's counseling, there's social work, there's family therapy, we have guidelines that we can't work with clients outside of the state in which we're licensed. I believe doctors have similar guidelines as well. So that also created this need for this directory because we have a lot of states to cover and we have a lot of families in each of these states. So that was another motivator for me to create this directory that had not been created at that point and still has, no one else is creating this directory. So, and then from there, I'm a co-founder with Lisa Rosenberg of a professional network called the Food Allergy Behavioral Health Association. We call it FABHA. So if you ever hear anyone talking about FABHA, that's what that is. This is really just a professional network for those of us who are in these clinical counseling professions. And it's a place for us to connect and collaborate, talk about this niche, help grow this niche, help share this information with our peers that aren't aware of food allergies, and really just sort of strengthen this because this seems to be a new focus lately in the last couple of years, and we'd like to see it become more of a focus in the future. One disclaimer I will give, and I always try to give this whenever I'm presenting or I'm commenting online, is that I can't provide counseling to anyone on their specific situation because I'm not your personal therapist and I'm also not licensed in New Mexico. So everything I'm sharing during the presentation or the question and answer section is general guidance. You're obviously encouraged to seek out a licensed counseling professional, a medical professional, including your allergist, for guidance and care specific to your situation. So with that, we'll go into what's the goal of this presentation and what will I be covering today. So the goal for the presentation today is to help parents understand anxiety basics and their own role in building a resilient mindset so they can model and teach this to their children. It's also to serve as a reminder that first, we have to truly accept that our kids or we ourselves have food allergies, many of which will be lifelong. We can't keep comparing our families to those who don't manage food allergies. And I think a lot of people, at least initially, have these feelings, and that's completely normal. But with time, we sort of have to say, I have to accept this and move on. If we stay stuck in those hurt, loss, and sadness feelings surrounding the diagnosis, it keeps us from being able to move forward and from developing the mindset and skills needed to become resilient. So we'll cover basics on the following topics: the parenting framework and parenting stages. Anxiety, will cover the psychological and physiological aspects. Mindset and the thought, feeling, action loop. I'll share a problem-solving technique that helps navigate our thoughts in stressful situations that you, your children, or their family can use. And then some reminders and tips on coping, self-care, and support groups. So for the first handful of slides, I'm going to explore concepts relating to parenting, which then gives way to more practical tips. And you may ask why I spend time focusing on parents when a lot of people just want to know how to help their kids. Well, here are my top 4 reasons why. As a family therapist, I've seen how important it is to help parents as well as kids with coping and resilience. It may feel easier just to address your child and your child's emotions, but if we do this without exploring and managing our own emotions, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a huge wound. Eventually, it's not going to work well enough. Another reason is we need to put on our oxygen mask before we help our kids. That saying really is true in this situation. If we can't understand and manage our own anxiety or utilize healthy coping tools, then how can we expect our kids to do so? Parents are, of course, role models and teachers for their kids, especially within the first 5 years of life. And they set the tone and theme for how to navigate roadblocks, modeling how to cope or not to cope. And finally, there's increasing literature to support the concept that working directly with parents helps with childhood anxiety, including a recent Yale Child Center study. And I've included that link to this at the end of the presentation. I believe there will be a PDF shared within your group with links to all of this information and additional information that I think you guys will find useful. So let's talk about resilience. What exactly does it mean, and what does it mean to be resilient? Well, the Webster Dictionary definition of resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or toughness, and the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. So if we apply this concept to food allergies, it means that over time and with the right tools, we need to develop the ability to weather the food allergy-related storms. These storms will often come in the form of stress, anxiety, and fear, social situations or new scenarios, and potentially even food allergy reactions and anaphylaxis. Therefore, we need to become rubber bands and slinkies, and then we need to help our kids become them too. I'm not exactly sure if our kids understand what a slinky is, but if you have one at home, you might want to pull it out and show them. Okay, so let's talk about the food allergy mindset. It's important to understand, accept, and manage anxiety. That's crucial so that you can understand your mindset. So mindset refers to our established attitudes or how we perceive things. I like to refer to our mindset as the glasses we wear, which allow us to see things through different lenses. These perceptions often dictate how we feel and think and what our actions and reactions will look like. So let's apply the mindset concept to a common food allergy scenario, going out to eat at a restaurant. Let's say we have extremely high anxiety about eating out. We're likely approaching the situation with the mindset that eating out at restaurants is always dangerous. Therefore, we would think to ourselves, do I have control at the restaurant? With high anxiety and low control glasses on, you're likely to conclude that you have no control at restaurants, which then elicits fear and the thought that you have no impact on what happens there. Therefore, the result is likely that you're going to avoid eating out altogether. Now, let's say we have some anxiety about eating out, but it's not extremely elevated. We might be able to approach the situation wearing moderate anxiety and moderate control glasses or mindset that allows us to see that it might be dangerous to eat out, but it also might not be dangerous. So in that scenario, with that mindset, your thought would likely be, where is my control? Versus thinking you have no control. This interpretation lends itself to a manageable level of anxiety, which then allows you to review and practice your food allergy tools that help keep you safe while eating out. This mindset can also help you have confidence in your ability to manage a reaction should one occur. So as you can see, mindset's really important in developing how you're going to navigate each scenario that you're faced with when you're managing food allergies. And that's true for yourself or your children. So in order to help you determine your own food allergy mindset as a parent or as an adult, I've listed a few questions you can ask yourself after the presentation, and they're on the screen. These questions will help you take an honest look at you and your family's general approach to life with food allergies. Be truly honest with yourself with these answers, because if you don't like how you answered them, you can use them as motivation to shift your mindset or build a bridge from where you are currently and then to the mindset you'd prefer to have about food allergies. So what's the parenting goal when we're parenting a child with food allergies? What's the overall goal we're trying to achieve? Well, as parents, it's really helpful to have a map or framework in mind to keep us on the right path, especially in those tough parenting moments when our worries and fears have the potential to knock us way off course. So here are 3 frameworks we can use to help with food allergy parenting. Number 1, you can ask yourself the question, if you were diagnosed with food allergies tomorrow, or if I were diagnosed with food allergies tomorrow, what skills would I need so I'm still able to live my life as I currently am? The answers from that question will be your guide, as you'd want your children to have those same skills as adults. Another framework you can use is thinking about the overall goal for parents of kids with food allergies. And these goals are to raise confident kids who take their food allergy serious and navigate life with decent amount of caution, but who don't live in fear or avoid living life because of their food allergy. It's to raise kids that have built the necessary tools and experiences along the way that gave them the confidence to be their own advocates, safety monitors, and to feel ready to navigate any situation that arises, which includes a reaction. And then another framework we can use is using the stages of parenting framework, which we're going to review on the next slide. We're going to spend a few minutes on this slide because there's a lot to it, and I'm going to talk through it so that it makes more sense. So this is Galinsky's 6 stages of parenting, and I really think it's important because we don't often think about children through this viewpoint. We often think about the developmental milestones that your pediatrician might talk about or you might read about when you're parenting. But I think it's really important for us to understand that we are growing as parents and we have a huge impact and role in how our children develop. And so I think this framework is a really good one to help us as food allergy parents understand what should our goal be at each stage of their development, and that way it keeps us on track. Our emotions are going to try to throw us off at any given stage because of different scenarios that come up. But if you have this map or framework to kind of refer back to, it's sort of a grounding framework to keep us kind of on the ground. So we'd never send a kindergartner off to college. They're just not ready. So they don't have the tools to experience it, college and navigate it well. Same is true with managing food allergies. Our kids need to experience increasing responsibility and autonomy with our guidance through each stage of development so they're prepared when they do go off on their own. As our kids are going through their stages of development, as I said, we're going through our own stages of development as parents. Galinsky's 6 stages of parenthood was created by a researcher named Ellen Galinsky. She conducted extensive interviews with parents who had diverse experiences in parenthood. She noted that parenthood was complex, of course it is, but she was able to identify common threads and similar shared perception among parents. This framework reminds us what our goals should be for each phase of parenting, especially when we're experiencing elevated anxiety and fears. And when we experience anxiety and fears that are elevated, especially, that typically results in our stunting our child's developmental growth because we want to avoid the things that make us scared or make them scared. So at the end of the day, though, our goal is what? We want our kids to be able to be self-sufficient adults, and that means that we have to keep these parenting goals in mind from the moment they're born and evaluate them along the way. So revisiting this framework from time to time can help us evaluate if we're fostering enough independence, too much independence, or not enough. So let's briefly review the stages and how it relates to parenting a child with food allergies specifically. The first stage on there is really the pre-child stage. And this is the stage before the child is born, and it's hallmarked by preparing for changes. So this is typically the same for all parents to be. However, if there's already a child with a food allergy in the family, the parents may be worried about the likelihood that a new child will also have food allergies. This would be a good time for parents to approach their allergists with these questions so you can have an evidence-based set of facts in front of you to help ease your worries. And statistically speaking, the rates of subsequent siblings developing a food allergy are relatively low, despite what most might think. The second stage is the nurturing stage. And in parentheses, you can see a title. Those are titles I put in there because I feel like those really explain what each of these parenting stages are. So the second stage, which is the nurturing stage, is usually during infancy. And the term I use to describe it is protector. Essentially because parents are, in addition to developing an attachment with and adapting to having a child, they're the one who's in charge of keeping them safe. Parents managing a food allergy are essentially responsible at this point for all food allergy safety, advocacy, and education because the kids are just too young. So that's a lot for parents to navigate. And in this stage, I often encourage parents that it's the time to develop your own self-care. You have to have solid self-care routines, establish reputable resources for evidence-based allergy information so you're getting really good facts, and find tools to help you manage your own food allergy-related anxiety. Practicing these routines from the get-go is going to truly help you weather the food allergy-related storms as they pop up, and they will, and it will be that much easier to model it for your child when they're old enough to understand more. Okay, so stage 3 is the authority stage. Mom and dad and caregivers are the kings and queens. The parents are the rule setters. This is usually during toddler and preschool years. So they're the rule setters and they're the enforcers. Parents develop routines to guide their child's behavior. For parents managing food allergies at this age, skills should be taught in a very basic, direct manner, focusing on the desired food allergy safety behaviors they'd like to see their kids using. By focusing on the skills and routines rather than the fear and the emotion, and by using age-appropriate terms such as "you could get very sick" instead of scarier phrases, you're already paving the path of resilience. You're already setting that model for them. I like to say, be aware that kids at this age are quick to pick up on tone of voice, body language, and other nonverbal cues. And additionally, we don't need to share with them how much we do behind the scenes to make situations safe for them. That's just too much information for them at that stage. That's something we have to keep to ourselves. Stage 4 is the interpretive stage, and this is around middle childhood. The term I use to describe parents at this stage is guide. So this stage is just as it sounds. Parents help their kids interpret the experiences they're having outside of the house, and they're having more of them at this age, of course. They're having experiences at school, activities like sports, and family gatherings. The practical skills food allergy parents are working on is transitioning age-appropriate tasks to their child. Maybe they start self-carrying their EpiPen, or at the very least remind you to grab it when you're leaving. In general, though, parents should allow their kids to take on as many food allergy-related responsibilities as they feel is appropriate for their child's age and temperament while serving as their guide. Because remember, the goal is to build these responsibilities into each stage of development with you guiding and overseeing. In this stage, parents are also helping their kids develop their mindset or their glasses with which they interpret their experiences. So you're helping them understand and make sense of interactions with others. And so they may be having interactions at school that relate to food allergies and people not understanding them. There might be bullying situations. And so really taking the time to help them understand and understand how they're feeling about these experiences as well. Parents should be asking open-ended questions to learn how your child envisions life with food allergies and what their experiences are. And one note I will say is that kids aren't always forthcoming with this information, especially if they feel like, they're getting bullied. They might be ashamed. So it's important to get into a routine of asking open-ended questions from the get-go to really understand their experience of food allergies outside of your home and outside of your vision. Stage 5 is the interdependent stage. It's the hardest one to say, apparently, too. This is during adolescence. And so the term I describe for the parents at this age is coach. So I typically say parents will know you've entered the stage when you get more pushback from your kids because they want more independence and autonomy. And that's a good thing. Again, remember, we want them to have that because as a developmental milestone, they need to have more autonomy and independence, but that can feel very hard when we add this layer of food allergy or other chronic illnesses. So from a child development standpoint, as I said, parents need to let their kids gain more independence, but of course, less control and more independence often produces increased fear for food allergy parents. The key, though, in this stage is that you're transitioning more and more food allergy responsibility to your child, but the key to doing that is making sure that they're actively involved in setting those renegotiated food allergy guidelines. So your role is really still to be their safety net while they're implementing all that they learned along the way through all those earlier years. But you have to have their input, and that's key on decision making. And that could relate to things such as how they're going to carry their EpiPen, what restaurants they feel comfortable eating at, and how involved they'd like you to be. We can simply say, hey, Johnny, you have to carry your EpiPen when you go out with your friends. But that can't be the end of the conversation. And we can say to them, you need to do this or else, but then they're going to shut down. So we have to make these back and forth conversations, and we really have to listen to them. And we have to understand how they'd like to approach it, and then guide them with the safe way to approach it from our perspective. At the end of the day, you're still in charge, of course, but the more you get their buy-in rather than coming across as demanding, which we typically do out of fear for them, the more likely they're going to follow the rules. I also say be sure to outline expectations and then the consequences if the expectations aren't met. And then stage 6 is the departure stage. This is typically from early adulthood on. We are the spectators at this point. So hopefully at this point, you're there really to support them when they need it, but otherwise you're there to celebrate the fact that they've learned these skills and they're navigating on their own, essentially. And of course, we'll reach out when they need help. But feel great that you've helped them learn these skills, and now they're independent individuals who are managing their own food allergies very, very safely. So I went through all of that because I think it's a great framework, but let's think about how constant, extremely elevated levels of anxiety is going to impact each of these stages. If as parents we have a constant anxious mindset and are wearing anxiety glasses all the time, our view is going to be seen through that filter, of course, and our actions are going to stem from that feeling. Essentially, we're going to be more reactive than using purposeful actions to manage anxiety, our own and theirs. So instead of allowing our food allergic kids to gain increased responsibility and independence, we're going to be more likely to avoid those tasks in order to calm our own anxiety. And that ultimately undermines the main goal of parenting a child with a food allergy, because we want them to learn how to navigate all of this. So let's take a closer look at anxiety and how anxiety presents. One note I'd like to make before we explore further is that, in my opinion, the term anxiety is often overused. We tend to hear things like, oh, he's got anxiety, or she's just a really anxious person. She's got an anxiety disorder. It's normal to have anxious feelings at times. We all do. But it seems common for people to be labeled as having anxiety or an anxiety disorder just because they have anxious thoughts. I personally don't like that. I don't think labels are very useful. And having anxious thoughts and having an anxiety disorder aren't the same things. In order to be diagnosed with a true anxiety disorder, it's more than just having anxious thoughts. But for the purpose of this presentation and to simplify things, I am going to use the term anxiety to refer to having anxious thoughts rather than having an anxiety disorder. So at the core, anxiety is just an emotion. That's it. It's neither good nor bad. It's when we assign thoughts and meaning to the feelings that help us determine if it's a negative or positive emotion. The interpreted meaning is also how we give it power. So what exactly is anxiety? Okay, the American Psychological Association's definition is: anxiety is an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. People with anxiety disorders usually have reoccurring intrusive thoughts or concerns. They may avoid certain situations out of worry. They may also have physical symptoms such as sweating, trembling, dizziness, or a rapid heartbeat. Okay, so that's the clinical definition, but let's explore how anxiety might make us feel physically. So I like the quote on this slide because it really speaks to me about what we feel inside. And it's from a book called The Happiness Trap. I have that in the links for the resources at the end. It's a really good book that I would recommend all parents and adults read. It's really empowering for us, and it has some really good tools in there. So it refers to our brain's evolution from the Stone Age through the present day, and how our brain is still wired to assess for threats, something that cavemen needed to do just to stay alive. So as parents of kids with food allergies, our brains often default back to that threat mode. When we're facing acute stress, a threat, or even elevated levels of anxiety, our body has physical reactions such as sweating, trembling, paler flushed skin, and increased respiration and heart rate. And again, this applies to us as parents, but this also applies to our kids and our teens. So you can kind of see how this is what you might see and experience them going through right in front of you in some situations. You may have heard of the term fight or flight. This refers to the release of hormones that helps prepare your body to either stay and address the threat or to run away and seek safety. The threat can be a physical threat, such as a dangerous situation, or even a psychological or perceived threat. Sometimes simply thinking about something that's terrifying can trigger the fight or flight response within your body. But it's important to remember that the physical sensations of anxiety don't always mean you're actually in danger, although much of the time we interpret it that way. So when you begin to experience these bodily sensations, it usually triggers the thoughts and emotions, many of which tend to be negative, of course, in nature. And when what your body is feeling becomes part of the anxiety loop, or the thought, feeling, and behavior cycle, which we'll touch on in a moment. So think about when you might feel these sensations in your body. You might feel them when you're at a new restaurant where your allergen is present and you're concerned about safety. But you may also feel these sensations when you're about to give a speech, which is a time when you're not in danger. So remember that the thoughts we attach to physical sensations in our body, our stomach, right, or our pounding heart, or our rapid breathing, the sensations that we're feeling and the thoughts attached to them during these moments are what gives meaning to the situation. So in the example of giving a speech, your mind and body are telling you that there's a threat because you're nervous and uncomfortable. But in reality, there's no threat. It's normal to be nervous when you're about to give a speech. In the restaurant example, while there may be an elevated level of threat, depending on how allergens are handled, the threat level may actually be lower than we think. However, our fears make us think it's not safe to eat there. So that's where we need to do our own work to understand, accept, and manage our anxiety or fear, and help our kids do the same thing. But let's explore some more anxiety basics first, starting with the typical worry cycle. So one good motto to use, and you can share this with your kids, is that thoughts are just thoughts, because it really is that simple. Our thoughts are just thoughts. They don't have any power. We give them the power based on how we're feeling and based on our own emotions and fear. Just because we think something bad may happen, such as a reaction, having those thoughts and feelings doesn't mean it will happen. And that's a really empowering thought for ourselves or our children to think about. We need to focus on taking the power away from our negative thoughts so they don't push logic out of the way. Because when we have a lot of fear and anxiety, or our kids have a lot of fear and anxiety, our ability to think logically sort of goes away. So the image I've shared on this slide illustrates the basic cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, concept that thoughts, feelings, and actions are all connected. One impacts the next, either positively or negatively. So when you find yourself or your child in a negative loop like this, the key is to interrupt it somewhere, anywhere, by reframing a thought, reacting differently, or not giving all the power to your thoughts and emotions. So with this in mind, this loop, the key goals for helping ourselves and our kids cope with anxious feelings are, number one, we want to help them manage the anxiety. We really truly don't want to help them to think about extinguishing or getting rid of or not thinking about the anxiety, because that's really not a realistic goal. They have to learn that anxiety is part of life. It is part of living with food allergies, but that we can accept it and use it actually as a tool. It's also to help them learn how to navigate the anxiety or situation. We don't want them to avoid things because of fear. Now, of course, if a situation isn't safe, and we've deemed it with facts and looking at the situation objectively, that we need to avoid it because it just isn't safe, then that's a different situation. It's also we need to help them build skills to cope rather than to build more worries or what ifs, because they're pretty good at doing that themselves. Another key goal is to encourage ourselves and our kids to become our own private investigators. We have to understand our thoughts and our feelings. So we need to help them separate the anxiety from the food allergy itself, so they understand that feeling anxious may feel awful, but it doesn't cause a food allergy reaction, and it doesn't mean that one's going to happen just because we feel anxious. This also helps them understand how their own worry feels physically different than a reaction. So another way to help with this piece is reality testing, which I have on that image. Reality testing refers to challenging our thinking traps with facts and past experiences, and that's a helpful tool. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Another goal to help ourselves and our kids cope with anxious feelings is to learn about and teach our kids about the emotional and physical aspects of anxiety and worry, And that helps demystify or lessen anxiety's power. So just the stuff we just talked about, what happens to our body when we feel anxiety, when we have worry, the physical sensations, understanding what's on this screen, the thoughts and the feelings and the actions all being connected. Those are things that we can teach our kids to understand, because the concept of anxiety and fear, it's this big bad thing that we tell ourselves we don't have any impact on, and that's really not true. We need to help our kids understand that they do have an impact on it, and they can take the power away from it and have the power themselves. Of course, another goal is to increase food allergy skills training so that you and they feel more prepared and confident to navigate situations, including reactions. We have to make sure that they feel confident to navigate reactions, and we have to feel that we are confident in navigating that as well. Because a lot of times we want to avoid thinking about reactions, but the more we avoid thinking about what if it happens, the more anxiety we're going to build. So we want to build our skills rather than our fear. And you want to ease into situations where you can practice these skills and expand as you gain confidence. So we don't want to throw them into a situation initially where their anxiety level about the situation is at like a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. We want to kind of start at a smaller anxiety level at first. Okay, so let's review some basic anxiety pieces and how it relates to both kids and ourselves. So here are some of the things we know about anxiety and fear that's going to help you with your own anxiety if you have it, or help your kids understand it. It's important to understand that new situations can be interpreted as a threat even if they're not. So we reviewed in previous slides that this can trigger those physical sensations. And that physical sensation reinforces our thought that the situation is dangerous even when it truly isn't. So maybe our thoughts, in an example of a playground, we might have fear going to a playground. So we might think that it's a higher risk level than it actually is. Maybe our kids have a fear level that's pretty high about just being in a classroom with somebody who's eating their allergen, and maybe they think automatically that they're going to react. But the thing is, we can't truly decide if these situations are threats without putting our thoughts aside and evaluating the facts, evaluating about the environment and our safety skills. Number 2, with more predictability and routine, that typically equals decreased anxiety. So when we know what's going to happen, what to expect, or are in a familiar routine, we tend to have less anxiety and worry. Therefore, whenever possible, we want to prepare and practice scenarios to help increase predictability and routine for ourselves and our kids. We also know that perceived lack of control or unpredictability typically equals increased anxiety. When we feel we don't have control of a situation, or it's not possible to have any impact on the situation, our anxiety and worry tends to increase. And again, this is often based more on perception than actual fact. So we need to shift our mindset for each scenario. We need to think, what do we have control over, even if we can't control the entire situation? So we can control, maybe in a situation, we can control what our child eats. We can control where the EpiPens are located. We can control how we will navigate if somebody offers our child an unsafe food option, because we're going to teach them how to do that. And we're going to teach them that by having those skills and building in that predictability of here's what you do when this happens, that's giving them the power to fight back against their fear. Number 4, avoiding things due to anxiety tends to increase anxiety over time. So I touched on this in a previous slide, but our instincts are usually to avoid the things that worry us. But this can actually be harmful, and it can actually perpetuate anxiety, which then can cause it to grow and extend to other areas, thereby creating more worries. And that's when you may see more generalized anxiety, where they might have anxiety that now, has to do with you leaving the house, or things that aren't just related to food allergies. So instead of avoiding everything that makes you anxious, one way to navigate it is to rate the scenarios from least to most anxiety provoking. Begin with the ones that produce the least anxiety and build up to navigating the others over time. By doing this, you're gonna build experiences that build confidence and resilience. Number 5, we know that anxiety isn't always negative. It can actually be a useful emotion. It can actually encourage us to assess risk, create coping skills, and get through tough situations. Our perception of the anxiety in the situation is what dictates whether we're going to use anxiety as a skill or a roadblock. So teaching our kids that just because we feel anxious doesn't mean that something bad is going to happen. It might be telling us that we need to do something differently, and that's a good thing. We can tell them the next time you feel anxious about something related to food allergies, Instead of just accepting that feeling as it is and going down that rabbit hole, we want to pause and investigate the underlying meaning. What's the thought that's making you worry? Maybe your anxious feelings are guiding you to create a new skill to help you manage your fear so that you can get through the situation. Number 6, anxious kids don't tend to take big risks. They're more likely to follow guidelines. So there's something good about that, in that they're probably going to ask a lot of follow-up questions and really kind of get used to guidelines and create their own guidelines. So they're probably going to take less risks because they're feeling a little bit anxious, and that's a good thing. And then number 7, kids and teens often show anxiety differently than adults. So it's important to keep lines of communication open, asking open-ended questions, and sometimes just being there to listen rather than jump right into problem-solving mode. As parents, we want to make things better yesterday, and we want to take away their pain and hurt. But honestly, truly, sometimes we need to just listen and hear what they're saying, because we might be thinking one way about it and they may be thinking a completely different way about it. So it's important to understand their perspective and just listen. And there's going to be links with additional information about anxiety in kids in the resource section that I'm going to share after the presentation, as far as different, and we'll talk a little bit more about it too, but as far as different techniques you can use, more understanding about how anxiety might present in kids, and more tips on what you can do as a parent. Again, these are generalities, and it's important to take into account each person's specific allergies and act accordingly. I always like to share that piece as well, of course. So here are some tools to help decrease anxious energy and manage feelings. Well, when we have anxious energy, sometimes we use a stress ball, right, to get some of that anxious energy out. So same thing for kids. Exercise is good, physical activity, fidget gadgets, all those kinds of things. That helps to get actual nervous energy out. Number 2, focusing on tasks and experiences that make them feel competent and in control helps build confidence and a can-do attitude. So even though, you know, we may be focusing on something not food allergy related, the more that we can focus on the fact that they are able to navigate situations, the more helpful it's going to be in helping them envision themselves as somebody who can handle things and get through situations that they may initially feel scared to get through. Number 3, we need to reinforce their non-food allergy related parts. So maybe they're a dancer or a musician or an artist. We tend to talk a lot about food allergies with our kids because it's really important, but we can't do it in place of talking about the other pieces of them. They need to understand that food allergies are just a piece of them, and we need to lead that conversation. Number 4, we need to allow them to express emotions that are feeding the anxiety that they're feeling. So typically under anxiety, there's more emotions. That's just the tip of the iceberg. They might be feeling hurt, anger, frustration, feeling left out. And we have to help them identify these underlying feelings, because especially at a younger age, they might not be aware of what's underneath that anxiety. Some mindfulness skills are useful too, things like daily breathing and relaxation exercises. And again, I'll have some links to some of these at the end of the presentation. The relaxation and daily breathing mindfulness activities can be really helpful also in reducing the physical symptoms of anxiety. So these are things we can teach them to do in the moment. So if they're at school and they're feeling sort of this, you know, however they describe their physical sensation of worry in their stomach with the butterflies, or they're feeling their heart racing, they can kind of use these things in the moment at school or wherever they're at without anyone knowing. And it's going to help physically calm down that fight or flight reaction in their body. We can help them have imagery. So have them think of a safe or relaxing image, a time where they felt good. Have them think of a time when they felt successful or confident. Imagery is really good at helping mindfulness and kind of ground us during times of anxiety. And of course, the more that they practice these skills daily or often, the more likely they're going to use it in those anxious moments. So when we can get good at using them outside of those anxious moments, we're more likely to be able to pull them out of our toolkit when we are feeling anxious in the moment. Some tangible tactics that we can use, and again, I'll say it again, I'm getting repetitive, but I will have links to some of these things at the end. I'm just glossing over them now. We can use what's called a technique called worry box or worry time. So this is especially good with younger kids and sort of elementary school and younger. This helps to limit or remove worries from the mind. We're going to say there's going to be a specific time and time limit to think about these worries, and we'll be here together going over them together. Or in the case of the worry box, we're going to take the worries, write them down on a piece of paper and put them in a box, and mom or dad or grandma, grandpa, whoever will keep them safe while you can go on and do the other things you need to do today, and then we'll revisit them later tonight or tomorrow. And a lot of times, if they get the worry out of their head, that may not be as worrisome when you come back to review it. And again, that's different if it's more of a chronic ongoing worry that sort of spiraled into this bigger ongoing worry that has a lot of tentacles. Some of these techniques may not help, but it's always good to try them and over time build other techniques that might help in your specific situation. Another mindfulness tactic is called 5-4-3-2-1. And this is really about getting ourselves and our kids out of that thought cycle that we talked about and getting us to be in the here and now. So 5-4-3-2-1, and I don't have that up there, but literally it's name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So we're asking them to be aware of their surroundings rather than be focused, include into their fear and their thought at that moment. Another thing, and I love this workbook, it's called What to Do When. It's actually a series of workbooks, but the one that kind of most relates to this is what to do when there's too much worry. This was written by a psychologist. It explores anxiety and fear for kids. It goes through all the things we've talked about in here. And this is something you can work with your child on. In fact, I've had parents say, oh my gosh, I learned a whole lot out of it too, even though it's written for kids. I'll have a link to that too, but that's something you can work on together. Additionally, if you're working with a counselor or therapist, that could be something that you can bring in and discuss with the therapist as well. Simply asking questions like, hey, what advice, this is good for older kids too, what advice would a friend give you in this situation? So taking the focus off of them. Sometimes they don't want to talk about how they feel and how their worry applies to them. So like, hey, what advice would a friend give you? Or what advice would you give a friend in this situation? What would you tell a friend? So that could be another way to sort of get out of your own worry cycle and think of it from a different perspective. And another tangible tactic to kind of explore and manage anxiety and worry is a two-way journal between you and them. Now, of course, you could use an old-fashioned notebook, or you could do this via like emails or on an app, or on a note on your tablet. You pass it back and forth. But sometimes rather than communicating with our kids would prefer to type and text to us. So that's another way, is a two-way journal between parents and their kids. So again, I have links to these in the resource section, but let's move on to a technique you can use or teach your child to use that helps if you're stuck with a fearful outlook on a situation and are feeling intense anxiety and a lack of control. So this is called the ideal problem-solving technique, and it was developed by Bransford and Stein. It helps define the main problem in a situation and guides you through creating and evaluating solutions. This can be very useful, especially in situations where emotions are running high and you find it hard to look at things objectively. So let's walk through this with an example of a parent who is too scared to let their daughter go to a play date without being there the whole time. So the I is for identify the problem. We want to describe it with detail. Have you had similar scenarios before? What were those like? So in this situation, this parent might say that the problem is, I'm too scared to let my child go to a play date without me there, but she really wants to go and I would like her to go if I could just get past my own worry. And again, this is something kids can use, so we can plug in their worries here as well. So if you want to think of it from that aspect as I'm talking about it, you can certainly do that. That mom or dad is going to move next to the D, which is define your goals. So in order to define your goals, you have to sort through your thoughts and feelings in order to get to a tangible goal that you can define. What would you like to happen? What would you like to see happen in this situation? So this parent might say, I need to determine if there's true risk for her playing at her friend's house without me there, and I need to decide whether I can become comfortable with her going, and if so, how. So she really wants, the problem is she wants her child to be able to go to this play date. She's really struggling with this, and so her goal is, I would like to find a way for me to move past my own fear in order to let her have this experience. She's then going to move to E, explore possible solutions. So what are possible solutions? Which one's the best? Is it a safe solution? What are the pros and cons of each of these solutions that we're going to list? A lot of thinking through this. So some of the possible solutions that this parent in this scenario might come up with are, 1, I can talk to the mom about safe foods, how to use epi, and then let my daughter go and stay without me. Okay. Another solution is I can talk to the mom and stay for the first 15 minutes until my daughter and I both feel comfortable, and then I can leave. And another solution might be, I've already talked to the mom. I still don't feel comfortable about her playing over there, so I'm not going to let my daughter go, and instead I'm going to invite her friend to play here. Okay, so those are some of the solutions that she's come up with. Now this mom's going to pick one and act on it. That's what the A is, act on it. Pick one of the solutions and try it. So ultimately this parent decides that she's talked to the mom about her daughter's allergy. She had her daughter bring her own snacks. She reviewed the EpiPen with the mom to make sure the mom knew how to use it. And she stayed for the first 15 minutes until her daughter and her were both comfortable enough for her to leave. The last thing she's going to do is look back. Did that solution work? If not, what are you going to do differently next time? How did you feel about that solution? Did it give you too much anxiety still? And maybe we need to go about it a different way. So this technique is one that you can use yourself with your child or teach them how to use on their own, or you could even use it as a family to work through situations. And of course, this is also useful for situations that aren't food allergy related as well. The benefit of this technique is that it helps you balance the emotion and the facts and helps decrease the power of the fearful emotions and increase the focus on where you do have control or impact in the solution. And again, remember, when it comes to anxiety, the way to fight anxiety, or one way to fight anxiety, is to remind ourselves that we do have the skills we need, or we're developing the skills we need to get through it and to handle the situation. So this is one way and one technique that can be really useful in that process. For the last couple of slides, and Ivy probably saw this online, I just wanted to touch on the importance of good self-care and support when parenting a child with food allergies and other chronic health conditions, because this is a thing that we usually push to the side. So this is an image from Holistically Grace. She's a counselor as well, but it accurately illustrates what self-care usually looks like for parents. We typically don't make time for anything beyond our physical health. And sometimes we only focus on that when we're forced to, when we have to go to the doctor or we're sick. But look at how much is underneath the surface that we typically ignore. And it's usually due to lack of time or priority. All of these pieces of ourselves are there no matter what, but we have a choice whether to pay attention to them or not. So why is this important? Well, while we usually want to focus solely on helping our kids and relieving their pain, we can't do that effectively if we're not focusing on our own self-care. It's not possible. So self-care is crucial since food allergy life is typically a marathon and not a sprint. Here are some reminders that we often forget about. Be sure to care about your whole self. You want to have the well-being for your mind and your body. Make time for you, and I have a capital U here. You need to carve out time each week, or if you're lucky, each day, to do something for you that's not related to caring for your kids or your food allergies. You need to take that hat off once in a while. You need to make time for you and your significant other, because marriages and relationships often get glossed over while parenting with food allergies and other chronic health conditions. And when you're having this time together, don't talk about food allergies during this time. That's off limits. You need to find humor in things to cut the tension. Laughter is a stress buster. And again, that's something we can share with our kids. You know, sometimes we need to just, in the moment when we're really anxious, we need to just find something that's funny and let that anxious energy out. It's a stress buster. Number 5 is being mindful if you're engaging in unhealthy behaviors related to navigating food allergies. This one's really big, and I don't think a lot of people really think about this. But if you find yourself researching topics online until 3 in the morning, or you're putting self-blame on yourself for your child having a food allergy, or you have anger levels or sadness levels that are beyond normal once you get past that initial phase of diagnosis, then it's important to be mindful of that and seek help if you need it. Self-care includes being kind to yourself along the way too. So we have to understand that we need to develop patience. You're building a food allergy confidence foundation, and that takes time. There's no way around that piece. And with food allergies, time really is your friend, because you're going to learn along the way. Remember, each time you navigate each phase with your child, and you're going to tell your children this too, each time you get through a new scenario, or each time you get through something and you go, hey, I was okay. Or even if you have a reaction and you get through it and you go, look, our EpiPen worked, our emergency action plan worked, we're going to remind them and ourselves that we're gaining pieces of confidence that are serving as blocks in this confidence foundation that we have. And as I said, even when things go awry and things don't pan out as you planned, you can use the ideal method that we talked about to explore different outcomes or plans for that situation in the future, and remind yourself that you got through it. Okay, so one last thing I'd like to kind of talk about with the self-care before we move on and go to questions and answers, and if you have questions about some of the resources that I have to share. But I'd like to touch on support groups and support in general. It's important to find support groups and support systems that are good for you at each stage of your food allergy journey. So support networks such as this one that offer evidence-based information that are encouraging and empowering are useful, because when you have a situation come up, you're going to be met with kindness and compassion. I think it's important also to know where you are in your food allergy journey. Each of the online support groups, especially, or social media support groups, have a different goal, theme, or flavor. So in some groups, you're going to find that they're heavily populated with newly diagnosed people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But maybe you're dealing with a teenager with a food allergy, and so being in that group that's primarily talking about preschool or navigating the first few years of elementary school with food allergies, that might not be the best place for you, because unless you want to offer mentoring and some guidance, that's absolutely a wonderful thing to do. But just be aware that not every food allergy group is built the same. They all have their own theme and flavor and goals. It's also important to find local friends who understand either food allergies because they're parents themselves, or they have a willingness to want to learn about it and support you. And then this is something that typically people don't talk about or bring up when they talk about self-care and support groups. But be aware if you're constantly talking about food allergies and venting about it to everyone you talk to. Focusing on food allergies is obviously important and a huge piece of our lives, but talking only about food allergies and your feelings about them can negatively impact some friendships. It's important to remember that there's more to you than being a parent of a child with a food allergy. Don't ever forget that. Just like we're telling our kids that there's more to you than having a food allergy, we need to remember that there's more to us, and we can't always be focused on food allergies all the time. So as a reminder, there's going to be, and I've listed sort of some of the links that'll be in the PDF that's going to be shared within your group shortly, I think. And it's going to talk, there's going to be links here to resources that are about things helping kids cope with anxiety, some information on food allergy bullying as well, some resources for parents, and just some really good information that you can read, learn more about, whether I talked about it in the presentation or alluded to it, and some things that you can apply for yourself and your kids.